It's now live is Congressman Adam Schiff, who is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Sir, I know today must have been exhausting. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight.
Great to be with you.
So you probably know by now that I am somebody who follows this story closely. I have read the Mueller report. I've paid as much attention to this story as I think is humanly possible. Even still, Robert Mueller, to my eye, covered a bunch of topics today, particularly in your hearing, that I never expected him to touch. I feel like he sort of cracked open some new avenues of investigation I did not expect to hear him talking about. Did you learn new information today from Mr. Mueller that you didn't know before heading into today's hearing?
You know, it wasn't so much, I think, for those of us on the committee, new information, and some of us have seen the more complete versions of the report and have a better window into some of the other issues. But it was just new and fresh hearing it from him. And you're right, he did go beyond the report. The report doesn't talk about the lack of ethics, the lack of morality, the lack of patriotism that characterized the Trump campaign. It doesn't characterize as directly as he did today how the president's statements are false. And so it was powerful hearing it from him. And that moment you just played and the questions he had with Peter Welch, that was to me the most chilling because it was so true. And all of this, of course, is forward-looking. Are we protecting ourselves in the next? What do we have to expect? And the point I tried to underscore at the end is we can't control completely what the Russians do, but we can control what we do. And if we're still open for business, for foreign intervention, then God help us.
One of the things that I found interesting today, and I didn't expect as much detail from Mr. Mueller on it as we got from him today, was him talking about the relationship between hidden financial ties and compromise by a foreign power. He talked about how financial ties that are illicit, that are potentially illegal, that are hidden and being lied about, is perfect leverage for a hostile foreign power to compromise or to extort a number of different people in the president's orbit, and indeed the president himself. Now, Mr. Mueller was not specific, at least was not definite, when he was asked whether or not his investigation, therefore, looked at the president's finances and tried to see if the president's financial records would show evidence of those kinds of ties or might be able to detail the ways in which the president may have been compromised by those things. Do you have clarity on whether or not Mueller and his team looked at the president's finances and looked at his taxes?
I don't think the Mueller team looked at his finances. I don't think they followed the money. I think they really, and the document I think bears this out, they viewed their mission as quite narrow, looking at these two vectors of Russian intervention, the social media campaign, the hacking and dumping operation, and then narrowly trying to assess, did the Trump campaign conspire with either one of those two things? Beyond that, they really didn't look, and the one glimpse we got today is when Mueller said, we got this counterintelligence information, this compromise information, and we fed it out to the Bureau. So I think Mueller viewed his job as to determine if he could prosecute people on these issues. Some of the other cases were farmed out. But in terms of whether he observed the red line that Donald tried to set around his finances, he wouldn't answer directly, but I think indirectly it looks very much like that line was observed.
Does that create new urgency or new justification for Congress being able to inspect those records themselves? Does that bolster the case for some of the House committees that they're pursuing in court right now as the president sues them to try to stop compliance with subpoenas for those kinds of materials?
It does, and you know, it certainly underscores just how false the do-over argument is. If Mueller never looked into these issues of compromise, then the nation is exposed. If we can't tell, and at the end of the hearing, Mueller talked about whether, he couldn't speculate about whether Trump is motivated because he still wants to do that Moscow-Trump Tower deal. He knows he needs Putin's approval, and that's why he can't bring himself to criticize Putin, or it's something else. And the fact that we, the American people, also don't know, that we have to speculate, is the problem. And so I think it falls on the Congress to do its oversight, to make sure the president is pursuing policies in our interest, not in his financial interest, that people don't have clearances that shouldn't have clearances. And we're starting to get some of those answers, Rachel. We had a lengthy meeting with one of Mueller's staff a week or so ago on the counterintelligence issues. But there's still a lot we don't know. There's still a lot the Justice Department is withholding. And we're going to fight to make sure we get that information.
Over the course of the two hearings today, as the hours stitched together and as Robert Mueller, I don't think increasingly, but persistently seemed old. He seemed like he was struggling at times to hear what was going on, maybe struggling to comprehend compound questions to him when they were put in terms that were complex. Robert Mueller today, and I don't mean this in any ad hominem way, he did just seem sort of less vital than I think I expected and than a lot of people expected. As that persisted over of the day today, and I don't mean to suggest that he's incapable, it just seemed that he wasn't totally on top of everything he was talking about. My mind kept wandering to the gentleman who was sitting next to him during the testimony before your hearing. It was described as Deputy Special Counsel Aaron Zebley, and my mind kept wandering to the guys who were sitting behind him, who were some of the senior members of his team. You mentioned that you have spoken with at least one member of Mueller's team recently in a closed-door hearing about counterintelligence matters. Do you expect that you'll be calling Mr. Zebley or Mr. Quarles or Mr. Van Grack or any of the other members of Mueller's team, particularly having seen Mueller himself today, to try to get more from his team, who actually seems to have done the work, about what their investigation was like?
Well, you may have noticed this morning that one person was particularly unhappy that Aaron Zebley was there and sworn in as a witness, and of course that was the president who was tweeting about it. There was another person who was, I think, very unhappy about it, and that was Bill Barr. Justice Department did not want him there. We wanted that precedent, frankly, that these members of the team can be called as witnesses, they can be sworn in, they can provide testimony, that the DOJ trying to stonewall that and make some claim of a policy just doesn't hold water. And this is even more true for people that have left the Justice Department. We're going to press to get the answers in whatever format and through whatever means that we need to. I think the short answer is going to be some of this work was done. We'll find out what work was done. And where there was no follow-up, where they were not allowed to pursue leads or allegations, we'll do that ourselves. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure we leave no stone unturned when it comes to protecting the country from people who may be compromised.
Let me just press you on that a little bit, Mr. Chairman. Should we expect open hearings involving other members of Mueller's team?
I wouldn't rule it out. We think that today's hearing was very powerful and very important in bringing that report to life and hearing it through Mueller's own words. And we look for other opportunities to do that, too. On some of the counterintelligence questions, it may be more difficult, particularly if it involves either ongoing litigation or classified matters. But where we can, we would like to do hearings like this in public that help inform the nation of the dangers that we face.
Yeah, I think if today we learned anything today, it's about the power of an open hearing. I know that in the Intelligence Committee you have to do a lot of things behind closed doors because of classification issues, but to the extent that the country has the opportunity to hear these stories, and particularly to hear it from the horse's mouth, boy, is there an appetite for it, and boy, is it valuable. Congressman
Absolutely.
Adam Schiff.
And this is why, Rachel, the Judiciary Committee is working so hard to get Don McGahn to come in and testify. That's also very important.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Sir, I know it's a big day today. Thank